YOLO composing gloves here. Today we're going to cover all the modulators inside of Faceplant. This video is really a reference video. So if you already know about modulators and you know what's up, you might want to skip this video as well as the next video because that's going to cover the master controls. They're just videos if someone's looking up and having problems with something or they want to know a little bit more. This is the video for you. We're not going to be demonstrating like in complex patches. We're just going to be looking at the behavior of these specific modules because I've actually already used a lot of these, an awful lot, in the previous videos, especially the one with the drum loop. There were modulators all over the place. So the LFO is arguably the most powerful LFO I've seen because it's basically a sequencer too. So it's kind of cheating. But let's go ahead and just get started here. So here we have an envelope. Now, all of these things are called modulators because they control things with a signal. So you can like take your hand and turn a setting, and you can do that each moment in time. Or you could have a signal that turns, like, let's say our signal starts at 0, then it goes to 1, and on the way there, it's got to turn things on, right? And then it stays at 1, so it's all the way on, and then it turns off, 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 off. So when we use a signal to control something, that's called a modulation. So whenever something is being changed in accordance to a signal, it's a modulation. Each one of the modulators has this wonderful little tab here to sort of show us the behavior of what's going on. Because these aren't like oscillations like audio would be. These are like really specific signals that just, they wouldn't sound that pleasant because it'd be basically just DC level, which is not that great sounding. Mostly clicks and pops when things turn on and off. So not that great. But if I play it, we'll actually see it. Let me turn the gain off here, and we're just going to observe this. So it'll take a while to turn on, and then it will take a while to turn off. There it goes, and I let go of the note, and we can see it coming down. That's the release. So this first modulator is called an envelope generator. Envelope generators are used to control signals over time, and they're most commonly used for volume shaping and also as pitch envelopes. So I actually don't know the history of why they're called envelope generators. I'm sure there's a reason. But basically, there's a bunch of different kinds of envelope generators, and we've been given one that can be a whole bunch of different kinds. So your first and most basic kind of envelope generator is an attack release envelope, which basically, in this case, we have to have our sustain up, I suppose, so it's not really possible. But you'll see them abbreviated as AR envelopes, and sometimes they'll be called attack decay envelopes because of this whole release shenanigan. So, or AD envelopes. So attack decay envelopes, basically signal turns on, and the length of time it takes to do this is called the attack, and then it turns off, and the length of time it takes to do this is called the decay. We're also given some abilities to change the concavity of the curve. So we can do concave down and concave up, and that's just like fancy math words. Basically, it turns on in this sort of a shape. So you see that? Ooh, that fancy. Let's hook this up to the gain. I'm going to put it up to 50%. Now, I'm assuming I've covered this in the previous videos, but you click the plus icon and modulate stuff. I've used this a lot, so that shouldn't be mind-blowing. But you can see we can go that way. We could also go down. For whatever reason, it's not possible with the other ones, though. We can only go down. So, like this one can't go up, can only go down. So, something to be aware of. Double-click to reset stuff. So, that's our attack, and then we have our decay. Now, the next natural setting is the sustain. And so when we bring a sustain in, that basically means while I'm holding the note and I keep holding it down, it's going to go through the attack phase, the decay phase, holding the note. That's sustaining. And then I let go. The amount of time it takes to get to this sustain level is what the decay is called. Now there's also this hold feature. Hold, and the acronyms get quite colorful at this point. They're like AHDSR envelopes. But hold is once we reach the attack phase, how long it stays at the attack phase. So that was quite a short hold. We make it longer. You see, there we go. So before it reaches the sustain. As a hold's not one I use a ton. The most common one by far is the ADSR envelope, which is attack, decay, sustain, release. There's a website and a YouTube channel dedicated to education, similar to my channel. And that's how famous this envelope is. You'll see it everywhere in audio. And so we have an attack, it decays down to a sustain while we hold, and then we let go. Very, very similar. A lot of sounds have this envelope. And I have a short release, but if we make it longer. The reason the release is getting cut short is because this envelope's controlling the output. So if we bring this release up, we'll hear this one. See, this one is getting us. So good to know your stuff, right? So I'm just going to go ahead. Long releases tend to drive me insane unless it's like a pad sound or something. We also have the ability to delay. I don't normally see delay included in the acronym. A DAH DSR envelope, that would be epic. But anyways, we have a delay, and that just stops the signal from starting until a certain point. So right now, if we click, we can actually see it. It's 1 second. So I actually pushed the note a while. I hear. There it is. So you can delay things. Useful if you have a patch that's timing sensitive. It's not a setting you grab a lot, but every now and then you're thankful that this knob exists. So there you go. That's the envelope, a really, really common thing. Let's just view another example besides just amplitude. Let's turn that off and bring this up like here. And let's just make a quick kick drum. Now, for whatever reason, modulating the shift value gives weird behavior and it's a little bit unpredictable sometimes. So I'm going to go to the semi-cent. And we can see we're doing a pitch up. So when this comes up, I want to do a pitch down because I want to make a kick drum. So I'm going to make this a negative modulation. And we're already getting a bit of a kicky sound, right? So this is like the attack of the kick, how fast it pitches down. Now, I want my sustain to be at 0 and my release to just go away. I don't care about that. And now this is basically, it's going to turn the pitch back up. We want this to be long. And what we're going to do is we're going to use our amplitude envelope, and it's going to turn off before this happens. Because if this is really short, we'll hear it pop back up to the original pitch. See, we don't want that. So we're just going to make this long. We do want a long release. And the reason for the long release is so it won't pop back immediately. See, that huge release keeps it from doing that click back. Boom, we have a working kick drum. So that is the envelope. Let's move on to the next thing, which is the LFO, stands for low frequency oscillator. And this thing is a powerhouse because it also basically features a sequencer, which we'll get to here in a second. But basically, we can control how fast this thing moves. Useful for turning settings on and off a little bit at a time. So if we have like a square wave and we want to do some pulse width modulation, we can modulate this a bit and have it move back and forth. Pretty handy dandy if we move it all the way up. Heck yeah. So that's a really common use for an LFO. But I use it all the time in effects when I want things to move subtly. That's a very common thing to do with it. We can increase the value and get audio modulation. But we can do audio rate modulation here where this is limited. It can only go up to 50 hertz. So we don't want to do that with our stuff right now. But because we can just do straight up audio modulation here. So there's not really a reason to use this. But one useful setting is we have sync. This will sync it up so it's at some individual tempo or some division of our tempo. So for example, we could put this at 8/16. Or we could have it be at 4/16. Which if we turn on the metronome and hit play, we see we're getting quarter notes, which just reduces to a fourth, so that makes a lot of sense. We can change the phase. Now this is an angle readout because if you're taking trig, this shouldn't be news to you, but basically a sine wave is just a map of phase with a bunch of triangles forming an angle on a unit circle as it moves around the circle. So these are called phase angles, and every single spot on this wave has actually got a phase angle associated with it. So as we move along, we get a phase readout, and that tells us where we are. But in audio, a lot of the times we simplify this to just being the starting point of a wave. Like, look, the starting point has changed. When in reality, everything has changed. There's been a phase shift. But that's just what phase is. Sometimes it can be important because we want to start out at a maximum or a minimum, which would be at 90 degrees for a sine wave, or at, we could go to 180 degrees and get an inverted signal. That's another really common one. Maybe you want things to phase cancel. You also have one shot, which is kind of an interesting setting to have in the LFO until you use it as a sequencer. Then this is an incredibly useful setting. But classically, you don't see this very often because you just don't typically use it. But basically, it only goes through the oscillation once, and then it stops. So that could be pretty cool. Some interesting ideas. Now, we have our various shapes. We have a square wave, which as you can see, boom, 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 triangle wave. And we also have the best mode, besides sine wave, which is the best mode, is this crazy custom sequencer. So this sequencer, or not sequencer, but I kind of view it as a sequencer. We could draw points in. So I could pull this point and pull this point over. And I can right click to straighten things out if I don't like the concavity. And let's put down another point. You just left click to put points down, right click, double click to get rid of points. And now we've formed basically our own little sequence. Like we could put something in right here and add another point. I mean, we could get super fancy with this. And now, like, that's pretty dang crazy. Now we could affect the length of this by just changing basically this ratio here. We can also change the resolution. Say we want, right now, right click to type in a value. Say we want a higher resolution, we could double it. And now I have a little bit more control over, for example, the attack. If I really want to stay synced up, you could also just change the snap setting and turn that off so you can just freely move along the grid. And this is something that I hope gets even further refined as we see future versions of phase plant. Like, for example, concavity bends being a little more intuitive would be epic. But, you know, right now it's pretty dang functional. Like, you'll see LFOs for days just because of this. Like, this opens so many doors. It's kind of mind-blowing. But yeah, you're able to change your XY resolution, snap setting, and get really, really creative with it. So the LFO, because of this, is one of the most powerful modules in phase plant. We also have random, which just generates random signal. Chaos is basically just amplitude. We have smooth, just smooths them out if you want things to go to direct crazy settings. We also have jitter, which jitter just right here we have a regular clock pulse. Everything's the same length. And we're able to add jitter, which makes the clock pulses irregular. We can smooth it out, give a really random feel. And we also have a hertz value here, a sync value as well. That's randomness. A lot of these settings like LFOs and randomness, I'll toss in to just control things very subtly. Like I'll modulate them by like a little bit. Like let's say here, I want this to modulate the sync ever so slightly. We'll move the sync up so it has a positive and a negative cycle. And, you know, small stuff like that can really bring a patch to life. A lot of times you'll see a lot of modulations all over doing small things like that. Randomness can do this, and it offers the added plus of it being somewhat, you know, it's hard to predict what it's going to do. It feels a little more organic a lot of the time. Now we come over here to these two special categories. So we have utility, which is like comparisons. Well, the menu didn't want to change. And we have MIDI, which has to do with this. So we have note, which is sensitive to the note input. So as we play really high notes, we go up more, and as we play really low notes, we go down more. Which is pretty handy dandy. I generally combine this with a multiplier, and you can also use this to make things pitch sensitive according to the notes you're pushing. So if you want to tune like a setting according to like frequency, the note option here can open up some doors. You just modulate it and away you go. Okay, let's go over. So that's the note module. Actually, I've used that. If you go through some of the previous patches we've done in this series, the note module is used a lot with things like the resonator effect. We have pressure. Now, this MIDI controller doesn't have pressure, but this one behind me does. And if I push down on a note, you see there's an aftertouch because it's got aftertouch, commonly called pressure in synths for some reason, is just when you push a note, if you push a little harder, very useful as an expressive control. You might attach this to a filter or a distortion to get a little bit extra punch out of it when you push the note a tad harder. Can make synths really intuitive. We also have velocity. That's just how hard you hit a note. So hit it softer, hit it hard, make things velocity sensitive. Now, okay, for utility, we're going to start out with the multiply module first. So multiply module takes in an input A, and this input A could be driven by a lot of things. So we could have, for example, a note value come in, and we could have it modulate A. So when we push notes on A, it's going to send out values between -1 and 1. It's going to get multiplied by B, and then we have a static multiplier. So we could multiply this by some value, and this gives us the ability to scale controllers. This is also demonstrated in some of the patches I've done in the previous videos, but I generally didn't talk about it. But I'll do this in case I have something I've got a modulator, but it's not in the range that I want it. Like, it doesn't cover a big enough range. You could use this to increase the range of the modulator and hook the inputs up. And I generally use one as like sort of a static thing to wrangle it in and connect the modulator to another input and set up the static multiplier. Away you go. That's the multiplier module. We also have a min and max, which are just comparators. So if I have an LFO and a second LFO, let's change this one to be a little faster. What it does is this is the max, and it's going to output the signal level of whichever one is bigger. So if B is bigger, it's going to output B. And if A is bigger, it's going to output A. That's simple. So if I go ahead and set these up with modulators, so that one's going, and let's actually slow this way down. So this is slow down. So we'll make this one a little faster. So it's taking this one because this one's max. Now they're both at 0, so it wound up at 0. One's at 1, so it's at 1. So it's always taking the maximum. This has been an interesting one. When I've grabbed it, it's always been something that I didn't think I would use it, and then I wound up using it. And I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but there have been cases where doing this has resulted in modulations that just sounded cool, so I stuck with it. We also have the opposite of this, which is, of course, the minimum. And so if we were to set these up with the minimum, it'll always take the smaller value. So maybe you want something to be off more often, but every now and then you want it to turn on. You can do that. Or maybe you want to set like a value like, hey, this is the maximum value it can be, but I'd like it to sometimes go below that. You can set a limit to how high it can go, where this one would set like a lower limit to how low it can go. So that's another really great use as for the min and max modules. But anyways, those are the modulators. There's just so many, and I just would rather just cover them all in a video because I grab them sort of when they're needed. I don't generally like sit down and say, I'm going to make a patch based off the note module. That's just kind of a little bit of a weird thing to do to me. So so this is it. So if you have any questions about these things, let me know. Subscribe, support me on Patreon. I always deeply appreciate that, and have a blessed day.